You know, thinking about Feech tickling that animal Blundetto and Tony's reaction makes me think of a three-way tug of war between the men that was perhaps planned, but we never got. Feech is really interesting precisely because we don't quite know what the original plan for him was. As many Sopranos fans know, and I touched on this in my other video on Feech, it's widely thought that Robert Logia's time on the show was cut short because he struggled with his lines and caused scenes to have to be refilmed constantly. He later died of Alzheimer's. And that's not a Sopranos quip, Logia really did die of Alzheimer's several years after the show ended, and it's possible the early signs of the disease were there on set of The Sopranos. This narrative is disputed by the likes of Alan Sepinwall, author of The Sopranos Sessions, who claims David Chase always planned to write off Feech early on, with the character being a device to show that Tony had learned and grown after dealing with characters like Richie and Ralph. But good thing then that his book don't mean no guts to me, as I don't see that as an issue. Of course Chase would introduce a character like Feech to eventually write him off, that's not what's being discussed. It's whether originally Feech's demise would have come much later. I remember Steve Sturipa saying on the Talking Sopranos podcast that the scene with him, Feech, Tony and Junior took ages to shoot because Logia kept forgetting his lines. Certainly when rewatching the show, Feech does seem to come and go really quickly for a character built up for so long. Like his entire arc was on a speed run. And did they really devote all of this screen time to a character just to highlight that Tony has grown? I've always wondered what the original plan for Feech was, given Logia's health interrupted one of the writer's impermeable stories. Could it be that originally it was Feech and Angelo Gareppe who were close in the can, but when Angelo is whacked, Feech goes off the reservation? And then Tony would have to give him up to New York, but risk alienating his cousin Tony B, who was also of course close with Feech. I mean, Feech and Angelo, two old-timers, being best buddies in the can makes a lot more sense than Angelo being friends with some random associate like Tony B. When Tony is having lunch with New York, there's an awkward 80-yard line where Angelo says that Animal Blundetto was his best friend in the can, when just a few seconds earlier he asked Tony who his cousin is. So he's friends with Tony Uncle John's cousin for 20 years, but forgets that he's Tony Soprano's cousin? It doesn't make sense. Maybe Angelo also had Alzheimer's. Perhaps instead it was Feech that was going to get hit by New York. I don't know why, lovers' quarrel maybe, a beef between him and Phil Leotardo over who's allowed to keep going on about doing 20 years in the can. But Tony gives up Feech to New York, and when Feech dies, Tony B goes irate. They were definitely setting Tony B and Feech up to be close. Feech giving Tony B cash to get started, the two driving around together, Feech even trusting Tony B enough to say to Blundetto, "Can I be frank with you about the Boy King?" Perhaps they were setting up a power conflict between Tony S and Feech, with Blundetto, loyal to both, stuck in the middle. And we do see in the first few episodes of Season 5 that Feech encourages Tony B to get back in the game, while Tony supported Blundetto's life as a civilian. It clearly seems that there's a storyline there that was being set up that is suddenly cut short. It's sad when they go young like that. Feech was a powerful card in the deck, and we never really got to see him played, whether it be as a usurper or his relationship with New York. The only thing I can't really see is why New York would pop Feech. Maybe Johnny Sack does it as a favour to a desperate Tony, in exchange for Tony taking out Carmine Jr. loyalists. But of course the story may have been completely different in the original script, and the idea of Phil Leotardo, who also just came out of the can, and Feech Lamanna having either a friendship or a conflict sounds mouthwatering. Feech did seem to be getting close to Johnny Sack, and given Tony backed out of whacking Carmine Sr. in Season 4, maybe Johnny Sack warms up to the idea of Feech as the new boss of Jersey. Whatever it was, Steve Buscemi had a contract for 2 seasons, but only lasted Season 5 because the writers realised they had written themselves into a corner with the character, and realistically he'd have to be killed at the end of this storyline. I think it's likely that it was due to the writers having to accommodate Logia leaving the show early that Buscemi got the short straw and they couldn't make the storyline work without bumping him off. Otherwise, how exactly did the writers write themselves into a corner with Tony B's storyline? Because it seems relatively simple. He comes out of the can, he does something he shouldn't, Tony has to put him down. So it does strengthen the idea that maybe it wasn't like that originally, and Feech's, Angelo's, and that Animal Blundetto storylines were basically cobbled together after Logia left the show.